The worst mistake a millionaire can make is firing the only person who ever loved him without wanting his money. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vaughn Global headquarters, turning the Manhattan skyline into a blur of silver lights and shadows. On the 47th floor, silence stretched across the boardroom like a wire ready to snap. Adrian Vaughn stood at the head of the long black table, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping a folder so tightly the edges bent beneath his fingers. At 38, he had built one of the most powerful luxury real estate companies in America, and tonight every executive in the room watched him with the same mixture of fear and admiration they always did. Cold. Untouchable. Precise. That was Adrian Vaughn. And Claire Bennett was about to lose everything because of him. Claire sat near the end of the table, her spine straight despite the humiliation burning in her chest. The soft cream blouse she wore was damp from the storm outside, tiny raindrops still clinging to the sleeves. In front of her rested a silver employee badge beside a notebook covered in pale blue sticky notes, written in her careful handwriting. Adrian's coffee schedule. Investor reminders. Medication alerts. Things no one else in this building ever noticed about him. Adrian finally broke the silence. Internal files from the Kingston deal were leaked to one of our competitors yesterday morning. His deep voice echoed through the room. And all evidence points to Claire Bennett. A quiet gasp moved across the table. Claire's fingers curled slightly beneath the desk, but she never looked away from him. She had spent 3 years working beside Adrian Vaughn. 3 years memorizing the way he took his coffee, the nights he forgot to eat during mergers, the silent tension behind his eyes whenever another billionaire shook his hand and pretended to be his friend. 3 years believing that somewhere beneath the expensive suits and icy control, there was still a human heart. Adrian slid a document across the table. Your access code was used at 11:14 p.m. Claire stared at the paper without touching it. She knew exactly who had used her login. She also knew exposing the truth would destroy several employees beneath her who had families depending on their jobs. So instead of defending herself, she simply whispered, I understand. Adrian's jaw tightened. That wasn't the response he expected. He wanted anger. Excuses? Tears. Something that would make this easier. But Claire only looked tired. Security will escort you out after this meeting, he said coldly. For a moment, nobody moved. The storm outside rattled the windows harder. Claire slowly reached for her badge, her fingertips brushing the silver edge before placing it carefully in the center of the table. One day, she said softly, finally meeting Adrian's eyes, you're going to regret the way you looked at me tonight. Something flickered across his face. Fast. Almost invisible. Then it was gone. Claire stood, grabbing her coat and notebook. The executives avoided looking at her as she walked toward the door. But just before leaving, she paused beside Adrian's chair and quietly placed one final sticky note near his hand. Don't skip dinner again when you're stressed. You get migraines after 9 p.m. Adrian stared at the note without breathing. Claire walked away before he could say a word. The boardroom doors closed softly behind her. And somehow that sound hit harder than any slammed door ever could. A few seconds later, Adrian loosened his tie, suddenly unable to breathe in the room that used to feel like power itself. Because for the first time in years, the empire he built no longer felt impressive. It just felt empty. The rain had stopped by morning, but the cold gray clouds still hung over Manhattan like the city itself was holding its breath. Adrian Vaughn stood alone inside his penthouse kitchen staring at a coffee mug that tasted wrong. Not terrible. Not even bad. Just wrong. He took another sip anyway, his expression tightening instantly. Too much sugar. The irritation hit him faster than expected. Claire never added sugar after investor meetings because she knew stress already gave him headaches. The thought arrived before he could stop it. He set the mug down harder than intended and walked toward the massive windows overlooking Central Park. Normally this view calmed him. Today it only reminded him how quiet everything felt. His phone buzzed nonstop with emails, stock reports, and board updates, but the silence underneath all of it was unbearable. No sticky note beside his watch reminding him about lunch. No soft knock on his office door saying, "You have 10 minutes before your next call." No quiet voice telling him he was overworking again. Adrian rubbed a hand over his jaw and glanced toward the dining counter where a stack of folders sat untouched. Claire used to organize every file by color before sunrise meetings. Somehow she made chaos feel manageable without ever asking for recognition. He hated himself for noticing that now. By 8:30 that morning, Vaughn Global was already moving at full speed. Elevators opened and closed. Assistants rushed through marble hallways balancing tablets and coffee trays. But Adrian noticed something strange the second he stepped onto the executive floor. People were nervous around him today. More than usual. Conversation stopped when he walked by. Employees avoided eye contact. Even the receptionist looked uncomfortable handing him his morning schedule. Then he saw why. Claire's desk was empty. Completely empty. No planner. No pale blue sticky notes. No lavender hand cream she kept beside the keyboard during winter. Just a clean white surface that looked like nobody had ever existed there at all. Adrian stopped walking. For a second, something sharp twisted inside his chest. "Who cleared the desk?" he asked quietly. His assistant froze. "Human resources came early this morning." Adrian stared at the empty chair. "Who approved that?" "You did, sir." "Right." He had. Last night. Angry. Cold. Certain. But standing here now, the decision suddenly felt rushed in a way he could not explain. Adrian entered his office and closed the glass doors behind him. The room smelled faintly like cedar and black coffee, but another scent lingered underneath. Claire's vanilla perfume. Barely there. Almost gone. He moved toward his desk and noticed something sitting near the edge beside his laptop. A small container wrapped in paper. His eyebrows tightened. He opened it slowly. Turkey sandwich on wheat bread. No tomatoes. Exactly the way he liked it. A sticky note rested on top in Claire's handwriting. "You forgot dinner yesterday. Again. Eat this before noon for once." Adrian stared at the note for a long moment. Then another. Something inside him shifted violently. Because Claire had packed him lunch before he fired her. Before she walked into that boardroom knowing her entire life was about to collapse. A hollow feeling spread through his chest so suddenly he had to sit down. Outside the office windows, Manhattan moved like nothing had changed. But Adrian Vaughn could not stop staring at the handwriting on that tiny blue square of paper. And for the first time in years, the most powerful man in the room felt completely alone. 2 weeks passed, and Adrian Vaughn discovered something terrifying about loneliness. It did not arrive loudly. It crept in quietly through routines that no longer existed. Through untouched lunches. Through empty hallways. Through waking up at 2 in the morning expecting a reminder text that never came. Manhattan glittered outside his office windows that Friday night, but Adrian barely noticed. His tie hung loose around his collar as another executive meeting dragged past 9 o'clock. Investors talked numbers. Expansion. Hotels in Miami. Resorts in Aspen. Adrian heard none of it. His attention drifted toward the empty chair outside his office for the 100th time that week. "Mr. Vaughn?" one of the board members repeated carefully. Adrian blinked. "What?" "The acquisition proposal." He stared at the documents in front of him without processing a single word. Finally, he pushed the papers aside. "Handle it without me." Confused looks spread across the room as Adrian stood and grabbed his coat. He ignored them completely. 15 minutes later, he sat alone inside the back corner of a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The air carried the sharp chill of early November, and soft jazz floated through hidden speakers while wealthy couples laughed beneath strings of golden lights. Adrian rarely came here anymore. Claire used to force him to leave the office at least once a month for something that resembled a normal evening. "Even billionaires need oxygen," she once teased while stealing one of his French fries during a late dinner after a merger meeting. The memory hit harder than expected. Adrian took a slow sip of whiskey and immediately regretted it. Too bitter tonight. Everything felt bitter lately. Then he saw her. Claire Bennett stepped onto the rooftop terrace wearing a long ivory coat, her blonde hair catching softly in the wind beneath the city lights. Adrian froze instantly. For 2 weeks he had convinced himself she was fine. Angry maybe? Hurt definitely. But still somewhere in the city thinking about him the same way he thought about her every night. Yet the woman standing 20 feet away looked different. Lighter somehow. Alive again. And she was not alone. A tall man beside her gently touched the small of her back as they laughed near the terrace railing. Dark navy coat. Broad shoulders. Expensive watch. The kind of man Adrian immediately hated without knowing why. Claire looked up at him smiling in a way Adrian had not seen since before the firing. Real. Warm. Unprotected. Something violent twisted inside Adrian's chest so suddenly his grip tightened around the whiskey glass. The man leaned closer to Claire, saying something that made her laugh again. Adrian's jaw locked hard enough to ache. He could negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking. He could destroy competitors twice his size before breakfast. But watching another man make Claire smile felt unbearable in a way he could not control. The whiskey glass cracked sharply in his hand. A thin line splintered across the crystal. Adrian stared down at it, breathing unevenly. Across the rooftop, Claire turned slightly at the sound. For one brief second their eyes met. Her smile vanished instantly. Silence stretched between them even through the crowded restaurant noise. Adrian stood slowly from his chair, unable to look away from her. Claire looked shocked. Nervous maybe. But the man beside her calmly placed a protective hand near her arm as if he already belonged beside her. Adrian felt sick. Truly sick. Because at that exact moment, Adrian Vaughn finally understood the truth he had spent years avoiding. He was not angry that Claire moved on. He was terrified she no longer needed him at all. Adrian barely remembered leaving the rooftop restaurant that night. One moment he was staring at Claire beside another man beneath the city lights, and the next he was sitting alone in the back of his black town car while Manhattan blurred past the windows in streaks of gold and rain. His driver asked twice if he wanted to go home. Adrian never answered. He kept seeing Claire's face the second their eyes met across the rooftop. Shock. Sadness. Distance. As if she already belonged to another life now. By the time he returned to Vaughn Global, the building was nearly empty. Midnight silence echoed through the executive floor while cleaning crews moved quietly through distant hallways. Adrian loosened his coat and walked straight toward Claire's old desk again before stopping himself halfway there. Empty. Still empty. Yet somehow it felt like she had just stepped away for coffee and might come back any minute carrying one of those ridiculous vanilla lattes she always tried convincing him to drink during stressful weeks. Adrian shut his office door harder than intended and poured himself another whiskey. Then another. Neither helped. His thoughts kept circling back to the same unbearable image. That man touching Claire's back. Claire smiling at someone the way she used to smile at him after late nights in the office when they accidentally started talking about normal things instead of business. Adrian leaned against his desk and suddenly remembered a night 6 months earlier during a winter storm. The power had gone out across half the building after midnight, while everyone else went home. Everyone except Claire. She had stayed beside him in the dark conference room illuminated only by emergency lights while snow covered the windows outside. You should go home, Adrian told her back then. Claire smiled softly while organizing papers by flashlight. And leave you here alone with your terrible mood? Adrian almost smiled at the memory now. Almost. Instead, anger rose sharply through him again. Not at Claire. At himself. At the strange hollow ache spreading deeper into his chest every hour she stayed gone. His phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. Daniel Mercer. Head of Internal Security. Adrian answered instantly. Tell me you found something. Silence lingered briefly on the other end. There is an issue with the timeline from the leak investigation. Adrian straightened immediately. What kind of issue? Claire Bennett's login was used remotely from another floor of the building. Adrian's expression hardened. That is impossible. That is what I thought too. But security footage shows Miss Bennett leaving Vaughn Global almost 40 minutes before the files were accessed. Adrian went completely still. Who had access to the footage? Only senior finance executives. A cold feeling spread through Adrian's body. Slowly. Dangerously. Keep digging, he said quietly. Do not tell anyone what you found. He ended the call and stared out at the sleeping city beyond the windows. His pulse pounded hard now. Claire had not defended herself in that boardroom. Not once. At the time he thought it was guilt. But what if it was sacrifice instead? Adrian suddenly remembered something else. The fear in her eyes that night was never fear for herself. It was fear for someone else in that room. His jaw tightened sharply. He moved toward Claire's old planner still sitting inside his office drawer where he secretly kept it after human resources cleared her desk. Receipts. Meeting schedules. Investor notes. Then halfway through the pages, Adrian found a folded document tucked carefully between the paper tabs. His heartbeat slowed instantly. Confidential payroll adjustment requests. And signed. Hidden. Every request protected junior employees from layoffs during the last corporate restructuring. Claire had used her own bonuses to secretly cover healthcare gaps for several assistants and interns inside the company. Adrian stared at the numbers in silence. Thousands of dollars. Quietly donated without telling anyone. His throat tightened painfully. Because while he spent years building an empire worth billions, Claire Bennett had been protecting people one paycheck at a time. And he had destroyed her life without even asking for the truth. Adrian Vaughn did not sleep that night. By 3 a.m, the lights of his penthouse were still glowing over Central Park while file after file covered the marble dining table around him. Security reports. Login records. Internal emails. Financial transfers. The deeper he searched, the worse the truth became. Claire Bennett had been protecting Vaughn Global from collapsing quietly for years while he stood at the top taking credit for stability he never realized she created. Adrian loosened his tie again, exhausted eyes scanning another report from Daniel Mercer. One name appeared repeatedly beside suspicious account activity. Gregory Hale. Chief Financial Officer. Adrian's expression darkened instantly. Gregory had worked beside him for nearly a decade. Polished. Loyal. Trusted. Yet hidden payments connected Gregory to the exact competitor company that received Vaughn Global's leaked files. Adrian stared at the screen in disbelief. Claire never betrayed him. Gregory did. And Claire knew it. The realization hit so hard Adrian had to sit down. She stayed silent in that boardroom because exposing Gregory publicly would have triggered massive layoffs during an already unstable merger. Junior employees. Interns. Assistants. Hundreds of people caught in the fallout. Claire sacrificed herself to protect them. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, anger and shame twisting together inside his chest. Then another thought struck him even harder. Claire lost everything because of him. Her salary. Her apartment stipend. Her healthcare coverage. Adrian suddenly grabbed his phone and dialed human resources immediately despite the hour. Mr. Vaughn? The sleepy voice answered nervously. I want Claire Bennett's termination file reopened tonight. Silence. Sir? Now. Adrian ended the call and leaned back heavily against the chair. His gaze drifted toward the city skyline beyond the windows, but all he could picture was Claire walking alone into the rain 2 weeks earlier carrying a cardboard box with her entire career inside it. Meanwhile he had gone home to a penthouse worth $30 million. The guilt felt unbearable now. Around noon the next day, Adrian found himself driving somewhere he never imagined he would go. Brooklyn Heights Medical Center. The address came from Claire's emergency contact forms. Adrian stepped from the black town car wearing a charcoal coat and dark sunglasses, but nobody inside the crowded hospital cared who he was. Nurses rushed through hallways. Coffee carts rattled across polished floors. Somewhere nearby a child laughed softly. Adrian moved slowly toward the oncology wing, feeling strangely out of place without Claire beside him, organizing every detail of his life. Then he saw her. Claire sat near a hospital window wearing a pale sweater and jeans instead of office clothes, her blonde hair tied loosely back while she helped an older woman adjust a blanket around her shoulders. Her mother. Claire smiled gently while handing her a cup of tea. The sight hit Adrian harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. There was no luxury here. No glamour. No billionaire lifestyle. Just fluorescent lights, tired eyes, and a daughter trying to hold her family together quietly. Then the man from the rooftop appeared beside them carrying a paper bag of food and bottled water. Tall. Calm. Familiar. Claire looked up at him with visible relief. Adrian's chest tightened painfully again. The man crouched slightly beside Claire's mother and spoke warmly enough to make the older woman laugh. Adrian watched from across the hallway, feeling completely helpless for the first time in years. He hated how naturally that man fit beside her. Hated how safe Claire looked standing near him. But before jealousy could fully take over again, Adrian noticed something else clipped to the man's coat pocket. A hospital identification badge. Dr. Lucas Reed. Orthopedic specialist. Adrian froze. Not a boyfriend. A doctor. Suddenly every assumption he made began collapsing around him all over again. And standing there in the middle of that hospital hallway, Adrian finally understood the most painful truth of all. Claire Bennett had never once asked him to save her. Yet somehow she had spent years saving him. Adrian should have walked away from the hospital that afternoon. A smarter man would have returned to his office, handled the scandal quietly, and buried the guilt beneath another billion-dollar deal. But Adrian Vaughn had not been sleeping like a smart man lately. So instead of leaving, he stayed hidden near the far end of the hallway, watching Claire Bennett laugh softly beside her mother for the first time in weeks. The sound barely reached him across the busy oncology floor, yet somehow it cut deeper than any accusation ever could. Claire looked exhausted up close. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes now, and her sweater sleeves hung slightly loose around her wrists, as if she had lost weight recently. Adrian hated noticing that. Hated wondering whether she had been eating properly since he destroyed her career. Lucas Reed handed Claire a cup of coffee while speaking quietly to her mother, and Adrian felt that sharp jealousy rise again before forcing himself to breathe through it. Not her boyfriend. Her doctor. The realization should have comforted him. Instead, it only made him feel worse. Because while Adrian spent 2 weeks drowning in wounded pride, Claire had been spending her nights inside a hospital trying to keep her mother alive. Adrian lowered his eyes briefly, ashamed of himself in a way he had never experienced before. Then Claire turned and saw him. Her entire expression froze instantly. The small warmth in her face disappeared beneath shock and caution. Lucas noticed her reaction and glanced toward Adrian with calm curiosity. For a second nobody moved. Hospital sounds echoed around them. Distant monitors. Elevator chimes. Soft footsteps. Adrian slowly walked forward, feeling strangely nervous, something he had not felt in years. "Claire," he said quietly. Her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "What are you doing here?" The question was not angry. Somehow that hurt more. Adrian glanced briefly toward her mother sleeping peacefully by the window before lowering his voice. "I came to talk." Claire looked away immediately. "There is nothing left to say." Adrian swallowed hard. Normally he could command entire rooms with a single sentence. Around Claire, words suddenly felt impossible. Lucas stepped forward politely. "I should check on another patient." Claire nodded softly without looking at him. Adrian watched Lucas leave and realized something uncomfortable. The doctor treated Claire with more gentleness in 5 seconds than Adrian had during the entire last month she worked beside him. Silence settled between them after Lucas disappeared around the corner. Claire stared down at the coffee in her hands instead of meeting Adrian's eyes. "You should not be here," she whispered finally. Adrian looked at her carefully. "You knew Gregory Hale leaked those files." Claire's expression changed instantly. Fear. Not for herself. For someone else again. Adrian noticed it immediately now that he understood her. You protected the employees under him. Adrian continued softly. You let me blame you because you thought layoffs would happen if the scandal became public. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Those people have children, Adrian. Hearing his first name from her again nearly shattered him. And what about you? He asked quietly. Claire laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. I was replaceable. Adrian's chest tightened painfully. Do not say that. She finally looked up at him then, eyes glistening beneath the hospital lights. You already did. The words landed like a knife between them. Adrian stared at her, unable to deny it because she was right. He had made her feel disposable. Temporary. Easy to erase. Yet now every hour without her felt unbearable. Claire looked exhausted suddenly, like she no longer had strength left for anger. My mother starts another treatment tomorrow morning, she said softly. I cannot survive another fight with you right now. Adrian glanced toward the sleeping woman near the window again and noticed a stack of unpaid medical invoices beside the bed. Something inside him cracked quietly. Claire followed his gaze and immediately stepped in front of the papers as if protecting them from him too. That small movement destroyed him completely. Because even after everything he had done to her, Claire Bennett still looked at him like a man powerful enough to ruin her life all over again. The next 48 hours changed Vaughn Global forever. By Monday morning, rumors spread through every floor of the Manhattan headquarters like wildfire. Emergency board meetings. Legal teams arriving before sunrise. Security escorting executives out of private offices. Nobody understood what was happening except Adrian Vaughn, and for the first time in years, he did not care about protecting the company's image more than the truth. Gregory Hales sat at the far end of the executive boardroom looking unusually tense while attorneys stacked evidence across the polished black table. Bank transfers. Encrypted messages. Unauthorized payments connected to competing firms. Adrian stood near the windows silently watching the city below while Gregory's confident mask slowly collapsed piece by piece. You are making a mistake, Gregory snapped finally, sweat visible near his collar. This scandal will destroy investor confidence. Adrian turned slowly toward him. Cold. Controlled. Dangerous in a completely different way now. You already destroyed it. Gregory glanced nervously around the room. Claire Bennett had access to every internal file. Adrian's jaw tightened instantly at the sound of her name. Do not say her name like this is her fault. The room went silent. Several executives exchanged shocked looks because Adrian Vaughn never defended anyone emotionally. Ever. Gregory laughed bitterly. You are risking your empire over an assistant? Adrian stepped closer to the table. No. His voice lowered sharply. I almost destroyed my empire because I failed to recognize the only honest person in this company. Gregory was terminated within the hour. Legal investigations followed immediately afterward, but Adrian barely noticed the chaos unfolding around him anymore. His attention stayed fixed on one thing only. Claire. By evening, rain poured across Manhattan again while reporters crowded outside Vaughn Global waiting for statements about the scandal. Adrian ignored every microphone shoved toward him as he climbed into the back of his car holding a small paper bag from Claire's favorite bakery downtown. Cinnamon rolls with vanilla icing. She used to buy them every Friday morning for the office staff even when she could barely afford lunch herself. Adrian remembered that now with painful clarity. Brooklyn Heights Medical Center looked quieter tonight beneath the rain-soaked streetlights. Adrian walked through the hospital entrance feeling more nervous than he had during billion-dollar negotiations. When he reached the oncology floor, he stopped immediately. Claire sat asleep beside her mother's hospital bed, curled slightly in the chair with paperwork scattered across her lap. Medical bills. Insurance forms. Job applications. Adrian's chest tightened painfully again. She looked exhausted beyond words. One hand still rested protectively near her mother even in sleep. Adrian moved closer carefully and noticed something that nearly broke him completely. Claire was still using the old leather planner he bought her during her first year at Vaughn Global after noticing she carried a notebook held together with tape. The edges were worn now from years of use. Sticky notes still filled the pages in neat handwriting. Schedules. Reminders. Grocery lists. At the top of tomorrow's page, Adrian saw 3 words written in blue ink. Call pharmacy again. His throat tightened hard. Claire stirred slightly, then opened her eyes, immediately freezing when she saw him standing there. Tension returned to her face at once. Adrian quietly held up the paper bakery bag. You forgot dinner again, he said softly. Claire stared at him in silence because those were the exact words she used to say to him almost every night. Adrian slowly sat across from her beneath the dim hospital lights. For a long moment neither spoke. Rain tapped gently against the windows beside them, while her mother slept peacefully nearby. Finally Adrian looked at her with exhausted honesty he could no longer hide. I fired the wrong person, he whispered. Claire lowered her eyes immediately. Adrian, no, he interrupted softly. Please let me finish this time. His hands tightened around the bakery bag slightly before he continued. I spent years believing loyalty could be bought with salaries and contracts. His voice cracked faintly. Then the only person who ever cared about me without wanting something in return walked away, and suddenly none of my money mattered anymore. Claire looked stunned into silence. And for the first time since she met Adrian Vaughn, the billionaire sitting across from her no longer looked powerful at all. He just looked heartbroken. Claire stared at Adrian across the quiet hospital room as if she no longer recognized the man sitting in front of her. This was not the billionaire who had coldly dismissed her in a boardroom full of executives. This man looked exhausted. Pale. Almost fragile beneath the dim hospital lights. For a long moment she said nothing at all. Then she looked down at the bakery bag resting between them and let out a faint, tired laugh. You remembered the cinnamon rolls? Adrian swallowed hard. You used to buy them every Friday for the interns. Claire brushed a strand of blonde hair behind her ear quietly. They worked hard. Adrian stared at her in disbelief. Even now, after everything, she still spoke about other people before herself. He looked toward the sleeping woman beside the window. How long has your mother been sick? Claire hesitated before answering softly. Almost a year. Adrian felt sick again. An entire year. And somehow he never noticed. Claire spent every morning beside him inside luxury offices while secretly spending nights in hospital hallways trying to keep her mother alive. Why did you not tell me? He whispered. Claire finally met his eyes. Because I did not want your pity. The honesty in her voice hit him harder than anger would have. Adrian slowly leaned back in the chair, staring down at his hands. Claire! I need you to understand something. She stayed silent. I thought I was protecting the company. His voice lowered painfully. But the truth is, I was protecting myself. I saw betrayal everywhere because that is what money teaches people like me to expect. Claire watched him carefully now. Adrian gave a hollow laugh under his breath. You know what scares me the most? He looked up at her, eyes heavy with regret. The moment I saw you with Lucas. I was not angry because I thought you lied to me. His jaw tightened slightly. I was angry because I realized somebody else might get the version of you I was too blind to appreciate. Claire's expression softened for the first time since he arrived. Barely. But enough for Adrian to notice. Outside the hospital windows, rain continued falling gently across Brooklyn while the city lights shimmered against the dark streets below. Claire glanced toward her sleeping mother again before speaking quietly. Lucas helped us when insurance stopped covering treatment. Adrian nodded slowly. I know. He never asked for anything in return. Adrian closed his eyes briefly because those words described Claire too. When he opened them again, his voice came out rougher than before. I reopened your termination case this morning. Claire looked startled. What? Gregory Hale is under federal investigation. Adrian leaned forward slightly. The board knows you were innocent. Claire immediately shook her head. I do not want revenge. This is not revenge. Adrian's eyes locked onto hers. This is me trying to fix what I broke. Silence stretched between them again. Then Claire whispered the question he had been dreading since the moment he walked into the hospital. And after your guilt disappears? Adrian froze. Claire's voice trembled faintly now beneath all her exhaustion. What happens when your world goes back to normal and I become another mistake you learn from? Adrian stared at her in stunned silence because she still did not understand. She thought this was temporary regret, temporary guilt, temporary emotion. Slowly, Adrian reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out the small silver employee badge she left behind on the boardroom table weeks ago. He placed it carefully between them. My world stopped feeling normal the second you walked out of that room, he said quietly. Claire's breath caught slightly. Adrian's voice lowered almost to a whisper now. And losing you did not teach me a lesson. His eyes glistened faintly beneath the dim hospital lights. It destroyed me. Snow began falling over Manhattan 3 months later, soft white flakes drifting across the glowing city streets like the world itself had finally decided to slow down. The giant digital billboard outside Vaughn Global headquarters no longer displayed luxury hotels or billion-dollar developments tonight. Instead, one simple message stretched across the screen in elegant silver letters. Bennett Creative Partnership Grand Opening. Inside the renovated Soho studio space, warm golden lights reflected against exposed brick walls while artists, journalists, and executives moved through the gallery holding glasses of champagne and quiet conversations. Paintings covered the walls beside modern branding installations and community art projects, funded entirely through the new partnership Claire Bennett built from the ground up. But the most photographed thing in the room was not the artwork. It was Adrian Vaughn following Claire through the crowd with the unmistakable expression of a man completely in love. Claire stood near the center of the gallery wearing a dark emerald dress, greeting guests with a calm confidence Adrian had never seen before. She looked stronger now. Healthier. Happier. Her mother's treatments had finally begun working, and for the first time in nearly a year, Claire no longer looked like someone carrying the weight of the world alone. Adrian watched her laugh softly beside a display wall and felt his chest tighten in the best possible way. He still remembered the terrified woman sitting in that hospital hallway clutching unpaid bills. Now she owned an entire creative company built around helping small artists and struggling businesses receive opportunities they normally could never afford. And she built it without depending on Adrian's money to save her. That mattered to him more than she knew. Claire turned and caught him staring again from across the room. You are doing it again, she teased softly as he approached. Adrian slipped one hand into his pocket. Doing what? Looking at me like you forgot other people exist. Adrian smiled faintly. That keeps happening lately. Claire rolled her eyes, but the blush touching her cheeks gave her away instantly. Their relationship had changed slowly after the hospital. Careful dinners. Honest conversations. Late-night walks through snow-covered streets where Adrian finally learned how to exist as a man instead of just a billionaire. For once in his life, nobody wanted anything from him except honesty. And Claire demanded exactly that every single day. No more secrets, she told him once during a midnight coffee run. Adrian never forgot it. Across the gallery, several reporters gathered near the stage as cameras prepared for the final speech of the evening. Claire adjusted a stack of brochures on the nearest table, while Adrian quietly reached into his coat pocket. His heartbeat suddenly felt ridiculous for a man who negotiated billion-dollar contracts without fear. Claire noticed his expression immediately. Adrian? Snow drifted gently outside the gallery windows while conversations softened around them. Adrian slowly placed 3 objects onto the table between them. Claire's old silver employee badge, the worn leather planner filled with faded blue sticky notes, and a small velvet ring box. Claire froze completely. Nearby conversations faded into distant noise as Adrian looked at her with the same raw honesty she first saw inside that hospital room months ago. You once organized every part of my life, he said quietly. My meetings. My meals. My disasters. Claire's eyes shimmered instantly. Adrian opened the velvet box slowly, revealing a delicate diamond ring glowing beneath the gallery lights. But there was one thing you forgot to manage. His voice cracked faintly despite himself. My heart stayed with you the entire time. Claire covered her mouth softly as tears filled her eyes. Adrian stepped closer, his expression gentler than the city had ever seen from him before. I spent years building places for wealthy strangers to call home, he whispered. Then you walked into my life and taught me what home actually feels like. Snow continued falling outside while the gallery stood completely silent around them. And when Claire Bennett finally whispered yes through trembling tears, Adrian Vaughn realized something no amount of money could ever buy. The best thing he ever lost was the woman he had been lucky enough to find again.